Hey, welcome everybody. We're so excited to be presenting today. What we want to talk about during this conference is give you some insight inside ransomware, talk about how ransomware crews actually run like a business, and we'll give you a real example. And then we want to give you some actionable tips that you can take away if you actually want to prevent ransomware at your organization. I'm Christian Hyatt. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Risk 360. I help run our security practice. And with me, we have Cory Wolff. Cory?
Yeah, how are you today? My name is Cory Wolff. I'm the Director of Offensive Security here at Risk 360. So that means that my team is responsible for all of the penetration testing, security assessments, vulnerability assessments that we provide for clients. So happy to be here with you today.
Awesome. So just to give you a little bit of context on Risk 360, because this will matter for the rest of the presentation. So as a firm, we do audits. So we do a lot of different certifications. So if there's an acronym associated with the security framework, we're often doing certifications and audits against those. The thing that's important about our experience is that we help implement security programs. So if you want to implement, let's say, a SOC 2 or ISO program, we can implement them. We also help manage them, where we're an extension of an organization's team and manage them as a virtual CISO. And most importantly, we do offensive security. That's Cory's practice. And the reason this matters in context of today's presentation is that we have different perspectives of seeing thousands of organizations. We've audited them, we've helped build them, we've helped manage them, and we help do penetration testing and offensive security on those same things. So we have a sample size of literally thousands of organizations. So what we talk about today will be based on that experience, based on some of the research that Cory has done, based on hacking ransomware crews, and then we'll talk about some of the controls that we've seen really be effective at organizations as we go. So a few of our goals today is I want to give you guys some context on how big of a problem ransomware is. So one of the questions that comes up often is, should we be investing important resources for our organization to even try to prevent something like ransomware? So I want to give you a little bit of context about what's going on in the industry, how big of a problem this is, and then help you think through if you should really prioritize this for a company, give you some words that maybe you can say to your executive team if you're trying to get resources or if you're trying to build a business case around building a security program. And then the question that always comes up is, well, if this is such a big problem, who are the bad guys? Who are the folks that are executing these crimes? And that's where Cory will talk about that. We'll look at some leaked Twitter documents on an organization called Kti, and Cory will dive into that. And then what we'll do is we're going to take a red team, blue team approach, meaning a good guy, bad guy approach of looking at actual playbooks that these organizations use to hack companies. And then we'll talk about some of the controls that you can put in place to stop them, hopefully, from getting inside your organization. So one of the places I like to start, this is a slide that I show largely at college campuses, because what I'm finding is that people are slowly not knowing what this is. You go back 5 years ago, especially 10 years ago, almost everyone in the class would raise their hand. They would say, yeah, I know what this is. But this last year, I spoke at the University of Georgia, and it was actually the first year no one in the class, in a cybersecurity class at that. So you're talking about technical people who didn't know what this was. So Cory, you cheated now. Do you know what this is? You should know now.
Yes, the Oregon Trail. The Oregon
Yeah, this is
Trail
Oregon Trail. So this is one of the first. It was like a floppy disk game back in the day. It was one of the first computer games that I ever played. And the concept behind this game is that you literally took an oxen wagon across the country. You built a family, you named your family, and you had to get your family safely all the way to the West Coast. And this game was based in the late 1800s when, like I said, you literally had to take horse and wagon across the country if you wanted to get there. Now, if you think about that, who is this person? So this is Henry Ford. I won't ask you, Cory, because I know you know now. This is Henry Ford. So Henry Ford is the guy who invented the Model T and modern assembly line construction. And the reason this is interesting is because I told you that Oregon Trail was the late 1800s. Henry Ford came along early 1900s. And from 1908 to 1960, 4 million miles of highway was built in the United States. And one of the things I think about, I'm kind of a history buff, so I like to think about what it was like, back in the early 1900s. People were going to the West Coast, literally horse and buggy. Now they're going by highway, and 4 million miles of road built in such a short period of time. You're talking about brand new economies, asphalt companies, road maintenance, highway, people making stop signs, stoplights, everything that comes with the infrastructure to make this happen. So the thing I start to think about is, when you are living in such a revolution, do you realize it? Did the people at that time realize that they were going through something that would change the whole world forever? And that's kind of what we're going through right now. We're going through this from a digital perspective. So this is a graph that shows the amount of data created over about the last decade or 15 years. And this is a measurement in zettabytes. And the key takeaway here is that there has been more data created in the last 2 years than all of human history. So just like Henry Ford and the Model T, we're living in this digital revolution right now. And a lot of us don't necessarily feel that or know it. I think we know from social media. We see that there's a lot of technology. We're seeing AI this year, but the amount of data created is just unfathomable. So why does that matter? So in context, we're thinking about these macro trends. More data is created now than has ever been created. Now we have the shared risk model. So if you think about your own company and all the third parties that they rely on. So maybe you're using a cloud service provider like AWS, GCP, or Azure. Your engineering team's probably using something like Jira. Sales team's using Salesforce. You have a HRIS system that your organization's using. The bottom line is, every company is becoming more and more reliant on other companies to do business. So we're in this unique environment where, from a cybersecurity perspective, it's not just your company that you have to worry about. It is also the security hygiene of the organizations that you choose to do business with. So we're on two trends. We're talking about digitization like never before, shared risk models, and then we're talking about the state of cybersecurity. So if we're looking at what is the criminal opportunity versus how much we're spending to defend ourselves. So cybercrime is estimated to be a $10 trillion criminal marketplace by 2025. Meanwhile, the good guys are spending about $300 billion a year to protect themselves on security controls. And the reason that matters is because there's such a huge asymmetry here. You see that it's a $10 trillion criminal marketplace and we're only spending $300 billion. It becomes pretty clear that there's no way that we can outspend what it's worth for bad guys to continue doing this. And one of the things I use to kind of conceptualize this is that cybercrime is set to outpace the drug trafficking trade. So everyone knows, you see it on the streets, how bad the drug trade is. And can you imagine that cybercrime is outpacing that? And this is the environment that we're in. We're in an environment of mass digitization, more data ever created than ever. We have a huge difference between what cybercrime is worth, 10 trillion, versus how much we're spending to fix it. We have a shared risk model. We're all relying on other third parties, and we have a very lucrative cybercrime industry. And that's just the reality. That's the environment that we are in. And what that means to me is cybercrime is not going away. We have to take this very seriously. There's more risk than ever. There's more crime than ever. So there's a really good business case for why our organization should have great security hygiene. And at this point, the question comes, if cybercrime is so big, who are they? Who are the bad guys perpetrating these crimes? And that's where Cory comes in. We've done a little bit of research to start thinking about who are the bad guys and what do they look like. So Cory, you want to talk about some of the research you did with Kti?
Yeah, sure. So Kti was a very large ransomware crew. In 2022, had a bit of a split up. So they had some internal issues, and ultimately they split up. Right. So because of this, this breakup that this organization had, certain individuals that were involved started to leak, tons of data regarding Kti internal operations. So one of the things that was released was over 160,000 chat messages, right? Various other data was released as well through, specifically one of the biggest places to find this data was the Kti Leak's Twitter account. It was an account spun up just to release information about Kti and data about Kti. And through these leaks, we were able to identify lots of different information. Here you can see that, after looking through some of this data, in this particular case, this is a image that SecureWorks put together after they really dug through all of that release data, and they were able to create an organizational structure based on Kti. In the middle there, you can see an individual referred to as Stern, and on the left there is Kti, which is the ransomware operation. As you can see, the organization itself was split up into three primary areas. So ransomware operations, business operations, and then tool and development. So these are big organizations. In this case, I think Kti, just on the ransomware side, 50 individuals as part of their organization running these crews, right? Very similar to a smaller, medium-sized business, and they're run very in a very similar fashion. One thing I'll also call out is that while this individual Stern was the head of the Kti ransomware group, Stern was also very much involved and led various other malicious organizations. So the big two there on the right are TrickBot and Emotet. TrickBot and Emotet are some of the oldest pieces of malware that have been around for over a decade, probably longer now at this point. And they are one of the most invasive pieces of malware across the world. So, I bet at one point or another, if you had a PC over the last 10 years, I bet at one point or another you had a version of Emotet or TrickBot on your machine. So it's interesting to see that, they use various tools at their disposal and multiple organizations in an organized fashion to start to execute a lot of this malicious cybercrime. You can think of it as Stern having multiple SBUs, right, separate business units, to achieve the goals that they want to achieve. So big organizations, well organized, and very good at what they do, unfortunately for us. So if we think about, how they operate, and we consider that they are essentially running as medium-sized businesses, in some cases large businesses, just like any other business, they need to have business processes. So if you think about a 50-person company, that 50-person company has SOPs. They have different processes for delivering products or services, whatever it might be. So just like any other business, these ransomware crews need to have a business process. And if we think through their business process, it basically boils down to these 6 high-level points. First and foremost, they need to gain initial access. So one way or another, they need to land on a victim network, right? And they need to get there somehow, whether that's through TrickBot, Emotet, research and development that they do internally, or some other means. They need to gain initial access. Once they gain that initial access, it's imperative that they escalate privileges. This is a extremely important part of what they do, because in order for them to move throughout this process and actually ransom the organization and encrypt the files, they need administrative access. So this is a key point in the business process for them. They do need to escalate privileges and gain administrator access to that network. Once they do that, they will locate sensitive information and exfiltrate that data for various means afterwards, possibly data extortion, things of that nature. And then they will actually encrypt the data. So they will go throughout the organization, encrypt the files that they discovered, leave a note that basically tells the victim how to get in touch with the organization, and then negotiate payment. So that's pretty much the high level 6-point overview of the business process. And if we go back and we think about a couple slides ago where we showed the organizational structure, you can see there's ransomware ops, there's biz ops, and then tool development, which is basically R&D. Right? And we associate that with their business process. You can see that this is basically how it would be broken down. So in order for them to gain initial access and escalate privileges, they need to have tooling. They need to understand, the inner workings of specifically Active Directory, right? They might need to create some sort of custom software to help them either gain initial access or spread throughout the network. So in the case of our business process and our org structure, that would be handled by tooling and development. If we look at the exfil data, encrypt data, and leaving that note that says, hey, we've encrypted your data, here's what to do, that would be ransomware ops, right? So this is the business unit that would drop the ransomware, and then hand it off to BizOps to negotiate payment. So they are structured, and they do need to operate in many ways, just like any other business. And just like any other business, they have playbooks. So what we'll do here in just a little bit is look at the Kti playbook that was leaked as part of these leaks in 2022. So we will look at a real world playbook from a ransomware crew, but they do have playbooks. So the individuals that are in the ransomware ops, for example, when they receive access and the network is handed over to them from the folks that gain the initial access in the tooling and development phase, right? They have a playbook that they run through, and it's step-by-step SOP. When you get into a network, this is what you do, this is where you go, this is where you locate files. So they're very well organized, very well structured, and for good reason. They've been extremely successful. To give a little bit of context into the true size, scope, and organization of these ransomware crews, looking at a message that was released as part of these leaks in 2022, we can see a message from an individual named Mango to Stern. So if we again think about that organizational chart a few slides back, Stern was the primary individual operating the Kti crew, and then the multiple other what we will refer to as SBUs. Stern's the head, right? Basically the CEO and the board all in one, right? But if we go and we look and we can see that Mango, an individual references Mango, is sending a message to Stern, our CEO, our leader, right? Talking about a biweekly salary breakdown. So this is a real message from a real ransomware crew that is giving Stern, the leader, a breakdown of the salary payouts for the next day. So you can see tomorrow is salary day. And you can see just from here the size and scope of this organization at the time that this message was sent. Their main team, 52 people. Their reverse team, 16 people. Research team, 6 people. OSINT team, 4 people, right? So they're pretty big. And they pay bi-weekly. So just like any other job, these individuals that work for the ransomware crews are getting paid bi-weekly. They're getting a salary, and they're operating just like it's any other job. Like Christian and I go to work at Risk 360 every day. These individuals go to work for ransomware crews every day. It's literally their 9 to 5, and they get a salary, and this is what they do. So using some of that data just from the message to Stern from Mango, we can start to generate an idea of how much these organizations are actually earning, right? So here's an example P&L for Kti, monthly P&L. If we look at some other data that's out there, specifically the government of the United Kingdom did a lot of good work into identifying how much revenue Kti made in 2022. This could primarily be done through research, through blockchain analysis. There's lots of ways that they can do it, but it's pretty solid data. And so Kti was estimated in 2022 to bring in somewhere between $180 and $200 million in 1 year. I'll say that again, $180 to $200 million in 1 year. It's I don't know what else to say. It's crazy that they're making that much money. That is a big organization. Think of any other company, at least in the US, that has a market cap of $200 million. That's a big company, right? They're doing serious work. And so if we break down their yearly estimates, we can start to come up with a monthly P&L. Just like any other business, they have multiple revenue sources. So in our example P&L here, ransomware payments are one revenue source. So that's where Kti themselves go in, gain access, ransom the organization, and collect payment, right? They also have data extortion payments. So they do have the opportunity to extort the organization for specific data that they might have acquired. They might say, hey, pay us X amount of dollars, or we are releasing all the PII of your customers or employees or something of the sort. So that's a second revenue stream. The third revenue stream, which I'm not sure is talked about too often, is ransomware as a service. So Kti was a big organization, again, $180, $200 million a year. They are a big organization, which means that they have the tooling, they have the resources, both in people, in architecture and software, et cetera, that they can lend out their software and infrastructure to smaller organizations. So if I wanted to start a ransomware crew, I could basically do it by just using Kti's ransomware as a service, right? All I would have to do is gain initial access, use Kti's ransomware as a service, and what do you know? I'm a ransomware crew. And they make quite a bit of money from that as well. So if we break that down, their overall earnings over a year, and we break that down into monthly, that's about $16.67 million of total revenue in 1 month from those 3 revenue streams. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. If we look at their expenses, right, just from using that message before as an example, they do have a biweekly payroll of about $73,000, which works out to about $146,000 per month. In that message earlier, you might have seen at the bottom, it said that there was about $3,000 to $4,000 in infrastructure costs bi-weekly. So that'll come out to, just as a quick estimate, about $8,000 a month. And then the cost of doing business. So the cost of doing business is, kickbacks, bribes, things that they need to pay out in order to operate where they operate. For all intents and purposes, they are able to operate freely in the countries that they work in. But of course, this costs money, which is typically about 20%, rough number. So even if we look at that, that's about $3.5 million in expenses. So on a monthly basis, a ransomware crew could net about $13 million.
Yeah, that's the part that kills me, Cory, is like, just for context for anyone out there who hasn't seen a P&L statement for maybe their own company, a world-class company, like a really well-run company, usually makes about 20% profit or less. One of the metrics I've heard is like 5% is common, 10% is great, 15% is outstanding. If you're above 15% profit, you're like a world-class company. Whereas these criminal enterprises are, darn near 80% profit. So like the revenue is huge. Like you said, like a $200 million company, that's a really good company. Company just doing $16+ million a month. People would be proud to build a company like that. But the 80% profits, it's like you just can't replicate that in a world that's not illegal. So what this means to me is like, crime pays, unfortunately. So organizations have so much incentive, especially if you're thinking about criminal enterprises that are permitted to operate in the second or third world against the United States, where they're not going to be prosecuted and their risk is lowered. I mean, they're getting paid 80% profits in US dollars in the second and third world, where they're probably not going to be extradited or prosecuted. And when you think of it like that, it becomes pretty obvious why there's such a huge criminal enterprise. It really is a lucrative industry. So kind of now Absolutely. A good thing to talk about, shifting gears a little bit. Y'all have some context of how big this problem is. We've talked about the ransomware crews, how they're constructed, their org structure, how they're monetizing their efforts. Now we need to shift back to us. Like, what can we do about it? Is there anything that we can reasonably do to protect our organizations? And so what we're going to do is we're actually going to walk through some playbooks, the Kti playbooks that Cory pulled in. Cory's going to talk about some, as an offensive security expert, he's going to talk through how Kti could potentially get in, some of the things that they would do. And then we'll talk through some controls, some things that you might can put in place at your organization to be able to prevent these. So go ahead, Cory, talk about these playbooks, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, sure. So as part of those data leaks, the Kti playbook was released and then translated into English. So Here is just a quick screenshot of page 1 of the Kti playbook. And so what we'll do here is we will walk through this real world playbook, walk through some of the steps that they would take when performing a ransomware operation, and then talk about some defensive steps that you could take.
And
today,
one thing
right?
too is like, how many organizations wish they had great procedures? You know, like we audit companies or we help them build it, and like almost no one has great procedures written. And you look at these hacking companies, it's like not only do they have procedures, they have like scripts that you can hand off to a novice to go execute. So just the level of organization's crazy to me. So we'll talk about step 1. How do they get access?
Yeah, sure. So step 1 is gaining initial access. They have 2 options in this case. They could either do what we're showing here is by using something called an initial access broker. An initial access broker is exactly what it sounds like. These are either individuals or criminal organizations that their sole purpose is to gain access to an organization. They could do it through various means, but typically in the criminal world, these are the real extremely technical folks. These are the people that are developing either O-days or really know how to execute complex exploit chains. But these are really the top tier of the, what we'll say, I guess basically hackers of the criminal underworld, right? And so what they do is when they gain access to an organization, they will maintain persistence somehow, whether various means that they could do that. But they will maintain persistence somehow and then sell that to another organization or individual. And so what you can see here is a real world screenshot of one of those websites and forums where you can go and find initial access brokers. This one in particular is called WannaBuy RDP. So this site is a Tor site, so it's out on the dark web. But this is a Tor Onion site where you can sign up to literally buy access to again, an organization. And so that's one way that they can do that is really just buying that initial access from another individual. Once they buy that access, they go in and then they start to go through the rest of their process, their business process to ransom the organization.
This is just for context, like a couple things we were talking about, Cory, is one is that there's a whole universe of organizations that are already breached. And now the whole game is to just not get noticed and then eventually sell that access. The second thing is we were talking about like, well, how do you trust another criminal? What if you pay, $2,500 for initial access and then you try to get access and, oh, they lied. Well, a lot of these come with guarantees. So like there's some murky ethics amongst the criminal underground where we're like, hey, if I try to sell you access and you couldn't get access, we'll give you a refund and give you another company. So again, it's just like this level of organization and I'll call it like ethics, if you will, or business agreements between parties is really, really interesting. And it's also kind of scary. There's just a whole slew of organizations out there at any given time that are already compromised. They just don't know it. And you can purchase access to that.
Yeah.
So then the question becomes on the blue team side, what do you do about it? What are some things that you can do? And to be frank, there's not a lot. There's not a whole lot that you can do to keep your information off the dark web. Some of the things that you can do is you can do threat intelligence monitoring. There's organizations that sell that. So like, let's say your ABC company, well, maybe you can monitor the dark web for your information out there. Is there evidence of compromised emails? Are there leaked documents? Is someone selling access to your company? And if that becomes available on the dark web, they can alert you and you can at least know about it, maybe try to take some action. You can also do domain name monitoring. And what that means is, let's say Risk360, if someone were to go purchase the domain Risk260, I would get alerted. That way they can't try to execute, put up a malicious website or start sending spam emails to try to impersonate my own email. The other thing you mentioned, Cory, which I thought was a great idea, was threat hunting. Companies have that, so you can have internal threat hunting team, or you can outsource that to try to understand if there's anything going on in your network or on the dark web. So those are some of the things you can do. I think for most organizations, they're not investing a ton in this. If you're a small business or you're just beginning your security journey, in all likelihood, you probably do not have a threat intelligence service. You're probably not doing that. You can do domain name monitoring and some of that other stuff, but if you're a more sophisticated organization, you feel like your risk is very high, you're probably a target. This probably is something that you're going to want to invest in and would be very important to you. The other thing I want to point out is if you look at all the security frameworks, like you look at NIST, you look at ISO, SOC 2, whatever certification you might get, this step is not represented. There's no framework that mandates that you do any kind of dark web monitoring, threat intelligence, or anything like that. So this is something that you'll have to do in addition to what a framework might require of you based on your own risk assessment. So just take that into consideration. Don't have a false sense of security because you're getting a security certification that your organization is probably already doing this. This is something you would need to do supplemental in addition to that.
Yeah, we agree 100%. And so the other way that we can really get in there, which is probably the most prevalent nowadays, the example that I give is the group known as Elapsys. Elapsys was responsible for the Twitter hack about, I think it was in 2021, 2022 timeframe. They got into Rockstar Games. They did that through social engineering. So they used, in their case, they used phishing, so voice phishing, where they called up employees of the organization and in one way or another actually tricked those employees into giving away sensitive data so that Lapsus could then access that network. Phishing, of course, I think we're all pretty aware of that. I think we're aware of that because it's still successful, which, it's still successful and it probably will be for quite some time. But social engineering is a big way. The other one, which we've seen a big, I think, uptick in over the past year or so is SMS phishing. So here you can see a real world example. So of course, Christian is our CEO, and this is a threat actor attempting to get me. In this case, they wanted gift cards, but it's not uncommon for them to have different goals in mind. But in this case, you could see where this is a real world example of them texting me and posing to be Christian, saying that they needed me to complete an urgent task. Of course, I knew what they were up to, so I started asking questions and, I had a little bit of dialogue with them. But this is a very common method. In fact, the other day, I just got an email from my bank alerting us that threat actors have been SMS messaging individuals posing as my bank. And so my bank showed an example of what the threat actors were doing, and of course provided steps to verify and everything else. I just got that yesterday, so it's still a very active method for them to attempt to either gain access or compromise other data in some way.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we deal with, bullet point here is security awareness training. So how do you stop phishing or social engineering? Security awareness training is probably your top way you can do that. So Cory mentioned that he got this text. It said, Christian Hyatt, looked like I sent it, or at least they tried to impersonate me, which means the organization that sent it had enough sophistication to know that Cory works at Risk 360. Christian Hyatt is the CEO of Risk 360. He might send the message, also somehow get Cory's phone number. So there's a lot of open source intelligence gathering for them to be able to execute that. And one of the things that we've seen at Risk 360 is anytime a new hire starts at Risk 360, they get that exact message that Cory just sent, which to me means they're probably monitoring LinkedIn to see when someone starts a new job so that they know that they're a new hire to send them over. And you can imagine, why is this so effective? Well, if we just hired a brand new employee, they're out of college, they're very anxious to please, they don't know me as the CEO very well, and they think they got a text message from me asking me to help them out. Well, they want to please, they want to do a great job. They want to respond to the CEO and buy those gift cards or whatever the scam's trying to get them to do. And it's a very, very effective mechanism. And that's where the security awareness training comes in, because at Risk 360, we actually had to start letting employees know this would happen and doing some training before their first day of work, which is incredible. We have to get ahead of it because we know by their first day, they might start getting these text messages. So bottom line is, one of the most important things that you can do to your organization is train them about security. Let them know that these kind of things are going on. Give them permission to ask questions or to push back if something seems suspicious. Let them know what the authorized communication pathways are, that your CEO won't text you. And if you do get a text, it's okay to call him and make sure it's actually him. So think through what that training should look like. It should be more than just a video, because these scams are becoming increasingly sophisticated. This is probably the number one type of attack that we see out there, is some type of social engineering or email fraud. The next thing you can do from a technical perspective is you can consider email security tools. So some common ones you might see in Google or Outlook are, for example, when someone sends you an email and they're from outside the organization, you get the header that says, "This is not from inside your organization," or "This is an email that you don't commonly get." Or maybe the email system strips out all the images to try to make it a little more secure, or there's some automatic anti-malware kind of stuff going on in the background from your email. So all those email security things you can do, they're very robust. Even if you're using Gmail or using Office 365, which are the two most popular, they have a ton of great built-in tools. And then moving a little further into the endpoint itself. So consider what would happen if someone did click one of those links or they did do something on their computer. Do you have endpoint device management? So something like Intune or any tool like that that's common. Do you have antivirus or advanced endpoint protection on there? So really tighten up the security configurations on the laptop itself. And the last thing I'll say is just think about access very carefully. And what I mean by that is limit access to need to know. That way, if someone does have something happen on their endpoint, it doesn't impact the whole organization. There's some segmentation. So what files and systems does that person have access to? And limit that to the extent possible. That way, if something does happen, they can't encrypt everything or download everything and exfiltrate as much as possible. So those are some of the things you can do around social engineering.
Yeah, and I will add that the network segmentation part of it is an often overlooked area, but if a host in one network gets exploited in some way, if there's good network segmentation, then it makes it very difficult for the threat actors to move laterally and move throughout the network. I would second that one.
Great.
Any day of the week. So as we move through the business process, so first we have initial access, and then they need to move on to privilege escalation. So you can't continue any of the steps in the process without gaining administrative access. So using the Kti playbook again as an example, there are certain steps that they will take to attempt to gain administrative access. First and foremost, Kerber roasting is one of the big ones. So they will actually perform Kerber roasting attacks and gain any service accounts that they can, hashes rather, for service accounts that they can, to take offline later and possibly crack the password using tools like Hashcat or John the Ripper, things of that nature. One of the other big things that they'll do, and specifically they'll use Mimikatz to dump LSAS memory. So LSAS memory is the process that holds credentials for Windows. So there could be Active Directory user credentials in there. There could be local user credentials in there. Possibly domain admin credentials in there, depending on if the domain admin logged into that machine. They do need administrative access on the local machine in order to do that. But if they are able to gain that administrative access, it's very common for them to use Mimikatz or other tooling to dump LSAS to try and attempt to get additional passwords. One other thing that they'll do is look for passwords in group policy files. So if we think about, automated scheduled tasks that occur through an Active Directory domain, or sometimes if they want to install a piece of software network-wide, they'll create some sort of group policy preference that requires a password in order to install that piece of software. Threat actors, as we can see from the Kti playbook, will look through and attempt to exploit those. So just like any other business, they have their steps that they follow, and they are quite successful, as you can see in the news recently and throughout the year.
So what do you do about privilege escalation? So this is where I'll throw out my disclaimer. And when you think about an organization that's trying to prevent any kind of lateral movement or privileged escalation. There's so many paths. Kti, that playbook had one potential path, but one of the things that we kind of joke about internally at Risk 360 is if you were to set one of our offensive security team members on a network for a year, and they just could tinker, they would probably get in. They could wait for enough things to change. They could do research. They could probably get on a network. So it's really, really difficult to prevent an advanced persistent threat from getting on your network. So what you have to do is you have to make it so hard for them that it's just not worth their time. They don't want to sit there for weeks trying to get onto a network. They could go to someone else's company that's a little bit low-hanging fruit and do that instead, or at least give you time to notice that they're there and take some action. So that's really where like all these frameworks come in, because there's so many paths. So you kind of have to do everything right, or at least make it so hard for them. So when I start thinking about frameworks, and this even comes back to governance. So like governance, do you have leadership's buy-in to get the budget and the time and the team necessary to protect your network? Are you doing risk assessments at your organization to identify the most critical assets? So maybe you want to protect that critical data a little more seriously than you want to protect another open area of the network. And a risk assessment might tell you stuff like that. Do you have policies that articulate what management's intent is and then enforce those standards, and so on and so forth? Those are the security standards that I would go through from a governance perspective. And then from a low-hanging fruit and technical perspective, some of the things I would definitely recommend, Cory already mentioned this and highlighted it, is network segmentation. So make lateral movement difficult, put up blockers so they can't just go anywhere in the whole network. Think about hardening standards on your infrastructure, whether it's cloud or on-prem. And then also just think about the blocking and tackling security hygiene. So that's stuff like enforcing really good passwords across the organization. Think about endpoint device management. Think about antivirus. Think about multi-factor authentication. Really good access controls to limit need to know. So all that basic security hygiene, that's stuff that you can do fairly easily. You can already implement most of that stuff with the existing tool set that you have just by configuring it correctly. You don't need an advanced tool or anything. So think about the security frameworks. This is a good time to kind of go through a playbook and implement a good security program. Focus on the high impact stuff, this low hanging fruit, like the password things that we talked about. And if you're kind of wondering where you can go on this journey for some best practices, I'm just going to throw you, this is a good screenshot opportunity. So if you're watching this, grab a screenshot, you can visit these sites. Number one is the Risk 360 YouTube channel. We do a lot of videos just like this. So if you just want some guidance on how to implement a security framework or some latest attacks or whatever it might be, go to the YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube, search Risk 360. All the videos are free, lots of resources there. Other stuff I'll point out is CISA has a whole ransomware guide that they've written in pretty human readable format. I think is pretty good. So go there. Two others I'll throw out is the MITRE ATT&CK framework. This is one of my favorite frameworks for conceptualizing the steps an attacker might take to get in, and then what you can do to prevent that from happening. It's a really cool web interface where there's drop downs and you can really think through all the ways that they could get in and some of the controls you put in. And then the last thing I'll throw out there is the CIS security benchmarks. So if you're looking for hardening standards that you can kind of plug and play, or at least give you some guidance for how you should harden your systems, especially across popular infrastructure like Windows infrastructure. CIS has great benchmarks out there that are also free. Of course, you can check out NIST and others too. So screenshot this, and then if you want to do some research on your own, that's a great place.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of good resources there, no doubt about it. So if we continue on our journey here, the next step would be data exfiltration. So in their playbooks, they will guide their operators to identify sensitive information and where to find that information, how to compress that information, and how to exfiltrate that information. So some of the common searches that you'll see is they're looking for passwords.xsl, right? So Excel files that have a named password in their title. They'll look through Google Chrome passwords, but they have detailed steps of where to look for sensitive information, how to zip it together. And then in this case, Kti used rclone to take that local zip file on the compromised machine They use rclone to then take it and upload it to Mega. So Mega is a file sharing website that's pretty popular among threat actors. And so they will locate the sensitive information, zip it up in a nice little package, and then using rclone, exfiltrate it to a site such as Mega. And that's how they will exfiltrate data.
And then so exfiltration is difficult to stop. I would say there's some low-hanging fruit, and there's some more advanced techniques that there's questions about whether or not the effort is worth it. So what most people immediately think when they think about data exfiltration is something like a DLP tool, data loss prevention. You can implement those tools. There's email DLP. There's whole applications and suites of DLP tools. I would say before you go that route, really consider if your organization has the risk profile and the resources necessary to implement a DLP tool. The downside of DLP tools is they're notoriously difficult to tune. So what I mean by that is sometimes you're trying to get legitimate traffic outside the network and it will stop that, or it will have a hard time identifying even the bad stuff that shouldn't be leaving the network that is. So there's some tuning issues there, both on the email side and on the enterprise application side. But things you can do is thinking about, can you block file sharing websites? So mega.io, for example, maybe you're going to block that site altogether where nothing can go to that because it's a known bad website. Maybe you want to prevent certain file size limits from exiting your email, for example, or maybe you want to set up some rules that say if there's files of a certain size or a certain amount of data leaving your network, you want to stop that from happening, or you want some kind of alert. So think through that kind of stuff. That's, again, tools that are available in standard firewalls, network tools, email tools, things like that you can implement. Cory, you want to add anything to this one?
No, I don't think so. I think that, if you combine network monitoring tools, we'll be able to see large amounts of data. And if you correlate large data transfer with a block list of websites such as Mega or other file sharing sites, if you couple those two alerts together, that's a pretty powerful solution to identify this type of activity. And so in this part of the process, we've come to the part where we are actually, the ransomware crew is actually encrypting files. So what they'll do is they will download their custom file locker, or in the case of if it's another ransomware crew that's using Kti as ransomware as a service, they will download a piece of software that Kti has developed. But regardless, they download this piece of software, which is the file locker. And they will create a couple files on one of the machines that they're on, and they will send this file locker to each machine using psexec. One thing to note here is that administrator rights are required. They wouldn't be able to spread this particular piece of software across the network onto each machine if they did not have administrator access. It's absolutely required for these steps. So they will get that piece of software using some automated scripting batch files. They will spread that piece of software across the network. They will then create a second batch file and then execute that piece of software on each machine across the network. So there's a couple of calls that are happening that are pretty loud from a network perspective. It's one machine making calls to each and every other machine on the network 2 times at least, one to put the software on it, and second to actually run that software. And at that point, that's when the organization, their files and data has been encrypted. And at this point, the ransomware crew would be looking to move on to the negotiation phase.
So what can you do to stop basically the execution of the ransomware and the encryption piece? So a lot of it we've already talked about. So a lot of it's just prevention. So like there's network traffic monitoring where you're stopping things from happening, because Cory mentioned that's a pretty loud event. There's hardening your local machine, for example, removing local admin rights. There's endpoint device management to prevent malicious software to be running on that and to spread the virus. So you can think about those preventative controls, many of which we've already talked about. But once that does happen, once you are encrypted and ransomware has been successful, that's when you need to start thinking about how you're going to respond. One is you can implement your incident response plan, which is a whole step for recovery. And two is just thinking about if you can actually recover. Can you back up your systems, or do you have to go into negotiation at this point to recover your systems? Hopefully you can back them up. So in addition to preventative control, start thinking about this tabletop exercise, your incident response plan, your recovery plan, your backups, and hopefully that will keep you out of hot water if attack does for some reason become successful. And speaking of incident response plans, this is another screenshot opportunity. We do a lot of tabletops at Risk 360 with our clients. And there's a few questions that always seem to be gotchas when we go through a ransomware scenario, the stuff that the organization hasn't thought through. And here's 5 of those categories that you can take back to your own organization to think through. Things like, could you even pay the ransom? Does your organization permit it? And if you wanted to pay the ransom, how would you do it? Do you get the FBI involved? Would your insurance pay out? Do you need to contact your insurance company and follow their protocols to even be reimbursed from insurance? So a lot of things to think through. Take a screenshot of this and compare it to your own plan to see if these things are addressed. And the last thing I'll mention is if you are sitting here right now and you're thinking, I wonder how my security program stacks up, we have prepared a free assessment tool for you. It's in Excel. It has really nice dashboards, so you can go through, it's based on ISO 27001, and you can checklist how mature you think your organization is. It'll give you a score. It also generates some really nice dashboards. That way, if you want to throw this in a slide deck, present it to your board of directors or present it to your executive team to try to talk about how mature you are and some goals for maturity, it might be a really good tool for you. We've put it in human readable format so you guys can interpret what we need. So that's all we have today. Thanks, Cory, and thank you all for watching, everybody in the audience. We really appreciate it. We hope this was valuable, so thank you.